The road stretched out endlessly, a ribbon of wet asphalt reflecting the late afternoon light. The rain had been on and off since morning, and by the time we reached the small coastal town, the sky was the color of steel. Evan drove the rental car in silence, focused on the winding road, his jaw tight from the week of meetings he'd just finished. I sat beside him, gazing out at the ocean that appeared in flashes between the cliffs, wondering why I'd agreed to come. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend. Just us. A chance to remember that we were still a couple, not just two people sharing a mortgage and an unspoken list of responsibilities. But the moment we arrived at the motel, a squat building with salt-stained siding and flickering neon, Evan's phone started buzzing. I recognized the name on the screen. Julian, one of his co-workers. By the second call, I knew our weekend was already shifting into something else. Julian wasn't alone. He had brought a friend, Marco, he said. They were staying in the room next to ours. And, as if the universe wanted to underline my disappointment, Evan announced over dinner that an urgent client matter meant he'd need to leave for a few hours. Just a quick drive back to the office in the city, he promised. I'll be back before you even notice I'm gone. Noticed. The second his taillights disappeared into the rain, the motel felt smaller, quieter, and much too still. A soft knock came at the door not 10 minutes later. I opened it to find Julian standing there, rain droplets clinging to his hair, a crooked smile on his face. Behind him, Marco stood with his hands in his jacket pockets, his gaze steady but unreadable. Evan said you might be bored, Julian said. We thought you could use some company. I hesitated, then stepped aside. The air outside was sharp with the smell of rain and ocean, and it followed them into the room. Julian moved with easy confidence, heading straight for the small table by the window. Marco lingered near the door for a moment before joining him. We started with coffee from the motel's tiny cafe downstairs, but it wasn't long before Julian produced a bottle from his bag, something amber and smooth that warmed my throat with the first sip. Conversation came easily. Julian had always been charming, but tonight there was a looseness in his tone, a way he leaned forward when I spoke. Marco didn't say much, but when he did, his voice was low and deliberate, as if every word had been weighed before leaving his mouth. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the windows. The power flickered once, just enough to make us glance at each other. Julian grinned, tapping the neck of the bottle against the table. Guess we're trapped, he said. The motel's lounge was nearly empty when we ventured there, the carpet worn but clean, the air carrying a faint scent of salt water and old wood. We sat in a corner booth, the three of us pressed closer than necessary, the hum of a vending machine filling the pauses. Julian's hand brushed mine as he passed me a glass, his touch lingering just a beat too long. I didn't move away. Marco sat beside me, his knee pressing lightly against mine under the table. Could have been accidental, could have been anything, but neither of us shifted. Evan called halfway through the second drink. His voice was distracted, already someplace else. Looks like I'll be later than I thought, he said. Don't wait up. When I hung up, Julian raised an eyebrow. Guess it's just us then. There was something in his tone, not quite suggestive, but close enough to make my pulse quicken. Marco's eyes stayed on me, unblinking, as if he was waiting to see how I would respond. I laughed softly, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear, trying to disguise the way my hands felt warm. I suppose so, I said. Back in my room, the rain still falling outside, Julian leaned against the doorframe as Marco stood just behind him. They made no move to leave quickly. Instead, Julian glanced around at the dimly lit space, then back at me. We should make the night interesting, he said lightly, though there was weight beneath the words. I smiled, though my mind was already racing. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, and somewhere inside me, a part one hadn't listened to in a long time was suddenly wide awake. The rain had turned into a steady downpour, thick drops sliding down the glass in twisting paths. The hallway outside my door creaked softly as someone walked past. A moment later there was a knock, not hurried, not loud, but deliberate. When I opened the door, Julian stood there again, the faint scent of rain on him. Marco was beside him, his hood down now, dark hair damp and curling slightly at the edges. The warm glow from the hallway light cast shadows across their faces, making their expressions harder to read. "Power's out in our room," Julian said with a grin. "Thought we'd crash here for a while." I glanced at the clock. Evan's last call had been over an hour ago. No new messages. I stepped aside, and they came in without hesitation, bringing with them the cool air from outside. The motel's emergency kit had one small candle, and I lit it, placing it on the dresser. Its flame flickered, stretching the shadows across the walls. The light was soft, almost forgiving, smoothing out the edges of everything. Julian leaned casually against the wall, crossing his arms. Marco took the chair by the window, his eyes flicking from me to Julian and back again. "So," Julian said, "since the TV's useless and we can't exactly go for a walk, how about we play something? Truth or dare?" I raised an eyebrow. "That's high school." "That's the point," he replied, smiling in a way that felt like he already knew I wouldn't refuse. The first few rounds were harmless. Truths about favorite cities, embarrassing childhood moments. But then Julian's turn came, and his eyes locked on me. "Dare," he said to Marco. Marco leaned forward, his voice low. "Sit closer to her." Julian obeyed without hesitation, sliding onto the edge of the bed beside me. His knee brushed mine, and he didn't move away. The candlelight caught in his eyes, making them gleam. When it was my turn, Julian's voice was soft but purposeful. "Dare," he said. "Tell us a secret," I replied, my tone steadier than I felt. He smirked, leaning in so close I could feel the warmth of his breath near my ear. "I've thought about this before," he whispered, his words deliberate, meant for me alone. My pulse quickened. I glanced at Marco, who hadn't looked away once. There was no smile on his face, just that quiet, watchful expression. The game kept going, but the dares were changing. Julian dared me to close my eyes for 30 seconds. Marco dared Julian to whisper something he'd never say out loud. Julian dared Marco to sit where he was now, beside me on the bed. The shifts were subtle but charged, like an invisible line moving closer with each round. I could feel the weight of every glance, every accidental brush of skin. At one point, Julian reached for the bottle of amber liquor we'd left on the table earlier. He poured a small amount into 3 cups, handing one to me. His fingers grazed mine as I took it, and I noticed how Marco was watching the exchange. The candle flickered again, bending their shadows against the wall. The air in the room felt warmer than it should have, heavy with something unspoken. Julian leaned back on his hands, stretching his legs out. "You know," he said lightly, "we could make the game more interesting." I raised my cup to my lips, taking a slow sip, letting the silence stretch. Marco's eyes were still on me, waiting. My heart was thudding harder now, but my voice came out calm. "Only if you take turns," I said. It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't even a question. Just words, hanging there between us, changing the shape of the night. Julian's smile shifted. Less teasing now, more certain. Marco's mouth twitched into something almost like a grin. Neither of them spoke, but they didn't need to. I'd given my answer, and they'd understood. Outside, the rain was relentless, drowning out the distant sound of traffic. The candlelight wavered, throwing their shadows closer to mine. The quiet between us wasn't awkward anymore. It was expectant. Julian set his empty cup down, the glass clicking softly against the table. Marco leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. I could feel both of their gazes, and for the first time that evening I didn't look away. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice tried to remind me of the reasons to stop, to keep my distance, to wait for Evan. But that voice was drowned out by the louder one, the one that had been whispering ever since the first knock on the door. The storm outside didn't let up, but in that room, the air felt different now, charged in a way that left no question about what was coming next. And I didn't move to stop it. The room was quiet enough that I could hear the faint tick of the wall clock over the rain outside. The candle's flame bent and straightened with every draft that slipped through the thin window frame, casting slow-moving shadows across the walls. Julian was the first to move. He leaned forward from where he sat beside me, his hand brushing mine before sliding over my wrist. The touch was deliberate, slow enough for me to pull away if I wanted. I didn't. Marco's gaze stayed on me, unreadable, as if waiting for permission that had already been given. His presence felt heavier now, his stillness carrying its own kind of pull. Julian's voice was low when he spoke. "Your rules," he reminded me. "We'll take turns." I gave the smallest nod. The candlelight painted their movements in half-light, obscuring details but sharpening impressions. The warmth of a hand on my shoulder, the faint brush of fingers against the side of my neck, the quiet, wordless understanding as one shifted away and the other moved closer. Julian's presence was confident, almost playful. His nearness felt like an invitation I had already accepted. Marco's approach was different, unhurried, observant, as if he wanted to memorize the way each moment unfolded. The storm outside deepened, the rain turning into a hard, steady rhythm against the glass. It muffled everything else, the sound cocooning the room in its own private world. They didn't speak much, and neither did I. The silence wasn't awkward, it was thick with awareness, each second stretching longer than it should have. I was aware of my own breathing, the rise and fall of my chest, the way my pulse matched the patter of the rain. The shift between them was seamless. Julian would lean back, his gaze lingering on me even as Marco took his place. Marco's touch was deliberate, measured, as though he wanted to see how little it took for me to react. Each time they switched, the air between us changed, Julian's energy sparking like static, Marco's drawing me in with a steadier pull. At one point, I caught my reflection in the darkened window. The candlelight caught only the outline of my face, but even in shadow I could see it, the unfamiliar softness in my expression, the way my eyes didn't look away. The clock ticked on. The rain didn't stop. Time blurred into something that felt both suspended and fleeting. Eventually, the storm began to ease. The heavy drum of rain softened into a light patter. The candle's wax had melted down to a shallow pool, the flame shrinking. Julian stood, his movements unhurried, reaching for his jacket. Marco followed, pulling his hood up. Neither said much as they left, just brief glances. Julian's with that same half-smile he'd worn earlier, Marco's steady and unreadable until the very last second. The door closed softly behind them, leaving me in the dim room with only the sound of the rain and the faint smell of melted wax. I sat for a while without moving, my hands resting loosely in my lap. The quiet felt heavier now, the earlier energy replaced by something else. Stillness, maybe, or the first stirrings of something I didn't want to name. It was almost dawn when Evan returned. The sound of his key in the lock startled me, though I'd been half listening for it all along. He stepped in quietly, his shoulders drooping with exhaustion, his voice soft as he apologized for being gone so long. He kissed my forehead without noticing the way I stiffened for just a moment. He fell asleep quickly, the even rhythm of his breathing filling the room. I lay beside him, eyes open, staring at the faint outline of the ceiling. My body was still, but my mind replayed every moment from the night. The candlelight, the way Julian's voice dipped when he leaned close, the steady weight of Marco's gaze, the way I had said yes without ever saying the word. Guilt was there somewhere, but it was faint and quiet compared to everything else. As the first gray light of morning slipped through the curtains, I realized the storm had passed completely. Outside, the street was wet and glistening, the air carrying the clean, sharp scent that follows heavy rain. Some things I thought would fade with time, washed away like puddles on the pavement. But not all of them. Some things stayed.